What's happening in the canine industry? For all the latest news, views, and expert opinions, stay right here for the Canine Paradigm. You'll hear from industry leaders, experts, doyens of the industry, learned colleagues, movers and shakers, and the odd randy guest. Get the latest insights and expert advice from both here and abroad from the people in the know. Now, here are your hosts, Glenn Cook and Pat Stewart. And I'm Lofty Fulton, and I'm out of here.
Glenda?
Yes.
We have to do a new ad.
We do.
It's a solemn time. Our long-time sponsor of the show, George Kittredge,
Yes.
very, very sadly passed away. And we formerly used to advertise for him his Rowdy Hound boxes.
We did.
So we don't actually know what's happened with Rowdy Hound boxes. You know anything about that?
I looked at the website. It said that they're recalibrating since their founder and boss has passed. But nonetheless, I think that you and I want to honour the memory of George Kittredge anyway. He was a friend to both of us, a hell of a good guy, and he supported us almost immediately. He was on board through and through, and I just don't want any of us to forget George. He was a terrific human being.
So we intend to continue to advertise Rowdy Hound, even though we don't know what's going on with them.
Yep.
In the hopes that they keep going, and that can be a bit of George's legacy that we're able to continue to promote.
I hope so.
In checking it out, we had a look to see, because we're not real good with the sponsorship. So we had a look to see who's actually paying for sponsorship. And we have a list of people to tell you that we support. And the first is our sugar mama, Barbara de Groot.
She's been with us from the start as well. Barbara's been an absolute staple in our...
She's a gem.
She is a gem.
She has a business.
She does. From the Heart Dog Training.
From the Heart Dog Training.
Yeah.
You can check it out. But she supports us as much and more than anybody ever has. So we appreciate you very much, Barbara. Another person who's supported us from the start.
The Einzelwiener.
Einzelwiener.
The Bullfed.
The Bullfed.
Yep.
It's where I get all my stuff.
Yeah.
It is, truly. It's where I get all my dog gear. If I need something, Jason's my first point of call. I don't use his shit website. He has a website. It's dog shit. I just message him directly. You guys probably should use his shit website, but I don't.
Yeah, because you don't want to message him directly and get his grumpy ire of the day.
Yeah, but do it. Get all your dog stuff from Jason. He's got everything you need. He's got all the shit that you need to train a dog for realty.
Everybody who comes to seminars and looks at meals and asks me meals questions, ask Jason.
Yeah.
Jason can point you in the right direction for getting the meal that's best suited for you.
I really like his leashes. I'm a big fan of his leash pack. That's why I sort of convinced him to do it. But anyway, get your stuff from Einzelwiener.
Yep.
Do you know who has a fantastic website and ships internationally?
My wife?
Your wife,
Yeah.
Canine Pharmaceuticals.
I couldn't imagine her not having a good website, how much of a perfectionist she is.
Well, the products are amazing. My dog merely being alive is a walking testimonial to that. My dog, who I've retired numerous times and has come out of retirement when I've managed to get his body back to healthy. And a big part of that is related to Canine Pharmaceuticals. So check it out, everybody.
I could say so many nice and biased things about Canine Pharmaceuticals and my wife, but what I will say is ignore me. Just look at testimonials. The testimonials speak for themselves. That's where the field trials are working. What makes Narelle's day, and mine as well, is when people are emailing in and sending messages of, well, primarily people have had no hope in the past because just everything that they were trying wasn't working, and now it is. And that is the testament that something is actually really working. And the other thing which I will add, one of the things that Narelle's told me in the past is dogs are incapable of understanding the placebo effect.
Oh, that's a good point.
So you can fake it on a human, but you can't fake it on a dog.
I never thought about that before. That's actually a really good point.
Well, my wife's actually a very smart person.
There you go.
So she's told me that humans are subject to the placebo effect where dogs are not. So it either works or it doesn't on dogs.
There you go. That makes total sense.
Yep.
There's one other person who puts a fair amount of work into this show.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah. Funny about that.
And I have a digital product that you can buy. If you go to my website, seriousdogbusiness.com, right now I've got 2 courses available to you. The Overview, which is a small course where you could learn how I teach.
Yep.
But the other one is the Wave Tops, which is a bigger course. It's everything I know about dog training. Well, it's not everything. It's a lot of what I know about dog training.
Yeah,
Check it
terrific.
out.
Yeah.
$500 dues. That's all it's going to cost you.
I recommend it when people are saying, what do I do? How do I get in the industry? I recommend them to your course.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
sir. All right, on with the show. Welcome back to the Canine Paradigm. I'm your host, Pat Stewart. I'm joined today by my co-host, Glenn Cook. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? You've had a bit of exciting times recently, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. There's been some excitement going on. Nothing really worth talking about other than that I had to delete a post and put it back up, and because I didn't black out a dog's eyes, but
Yeah. Wow.
but it's up now.
Dog
So
world
all's
shenanigans.
well. Yeah, that's life.
Mm.
Matt, I've got something I want to talk about.
Go ahead.
This week, I've had a lot of clients that it's funny how things work. You know, things either do really come in waves or you just identify the same problem all the time. When you're looking for it, you find it. And one of the things that, you know, the bugbears that I've been on for a little while, you know, I used to be a fairly don't put the leash on the dog kind of guy myself, right? I enjoy shaping. I enjoy letting the dog figure things out. I enjoy giving the dog as much freedom as I possibly can. But I've had just a spate of instances in the last little while where it's become clear that I want to talk about something that I sort of think of as the triangle of control. And that's kind of a working title. And I didn't make any of this up. I've just never heard anybody explain it in this way. So that's what I'm going to call it for today, as I thought I would just think it through with you.
Yeah, nice. Have at it, sir.
Yeah. So my feeling is that when I was in the army, which, you know, has been front of mind in the last week, for people who don't follow us on social media and have no idea what's going on, one of the dogs that Jazz raised and I help her with, we sold to my old unit during the week. And so I was out there and I've been interacting with a lot of army guys, more than I have in a long while. And just because of the way that the handover went, I ended up speaking to, you know, people I haven't spoken to in 10 years and was back in that world just for a little while. And one of the things that is really true, so long time ago, there's this company called Magpul and they make gun parts. And then they were employing these guys. I can't even remember their names, but one was like a Coast Guard guy, Chris Costa, I think was his name. And they would do these quite cool, a little bit too stylized for the reality, but these sort of combat shooting drills. And Magpul made these gun parts that made these drills possible. But part of the Magpul, I'm pretty sure it was Magpul, part of their pistol training thing was that there's three things that go into shooting a pistol correctly. There's the sight picture has to be correct, right? Like you have to have really, really good aiming and correct, not just like aimed on, because on isn't always correct, right? So it has to be correct. Your grip has to be correct, right? There's a particular way to hold a pistol. And then your trigger pull has to be correct in that you got to not slap at it. You got to pull it in a straight line. Now, any one of those things, like all three of those come together to form a correct shot. And the truth is, it's not always possible to get all three of them because that's just the reality. You know, sometimes you can't get the correct sight picture. It's just not going to work. Sometimes the way that you happen to just put your hand on your pistol as it comes out of the holster, you don't get the correct grip and you don't have the time and space to fix that before you have to get a shot off. But one of the things that they teach, and, you know, we put into practice a lot, and I swore by when this was my job, not just to do this, but to teach it also, was that, yes, we want all three of those things, but if you can't get one of them, in order to still be successful, you have to really concentrate on the other two. And then as you get more and more competent and things start to fall into just being a habit or second nature, you can start to drop them all away. But in those early phases, there's three things they called the triangle of something or other. I can't even remember what it is. But you need 2 points of the triangle at a minimum. And then the third one can be not so important. And I've kind of always thought about that in terms of dog training, a similar thing. In that when you are training a dog, no matter what you're training the dog for, it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a reactive pet or some kind of like high level performance dog of any kind, there's this triangle of control that I think of where you need to be in control of the dog. So what I mean by that is able to physically manipulate the dog in the way that is necessary at the time. So the dog can't just run off on you. You are able to put the dog where and how you want it to go. To me, that means having the appropriate tools on the dog. That means having the appropriate leashes on the dog. I know we still have a lot of non-tool using listeners. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use, like, you know, you have to use the prong collar. But what it means is you have to have the leash on. The leash is a tool. You have to have the appropriate control mechanism, which could be as simple as the leash and the harness, if that's how you want to think about it. But it's being physically in control of the dog and what it does. So that's one of the points of the triangle. The other is controlling the reinforcer. So when we're training with a dog, we have to have a way of telling the dog like, hey, yeah, that was good. That's the thing that I'm trying to work you towards. You've either gotten it or you're making success towards it. And so the reinforcer is the thing that we're using to say to the dog, hey, good work. You did the right thing. Here's your payment. If you want more of that payment, do that thing again. And we have to be in control of that, because if we're in control of the dog and we have to keep the dog next to us, but the reinforcer just keeps jumping into the dog's mouth, then we are not able to exert true control over the situation and take control of the training in a way that is going to influence the dog correctly. The reinforcer isn't always obvious. I think that, when we think of reinforcer, a lot of the times we think of, well, it's the tug or it's the food. But often in lifestyle situations, it's something that is environmental, right? And so the reinforcer can be something that is very hard to control. It might be the presence of other dogs. It might be getting to go and play with other dogs. It could be birds. It could be livestock. It could be, it could be access to another person who wants to interact with the dog. Whatever it is that we intend to say to the dog, yes, because you did the right thing or you made progress towards the right thing, now you get access to your resource or whatever it is that you actually want. And ultimately, we think of that as the reinforcer. So we've got control the dog, control the dog's access to the reinforcers, and therefore control the reinforcer. And then the last thing we talk about is like controlling the environment, because there's other things that move around while we're training a dog that are not necessarily reinforcers, but are things that could be seen as punishers, or we could even put into the category of distractions, if that were what we want to call it. And so that's what I think of when I think about the triangle of control. I think you need to be in control of the dog. I think you need to be in control of the dog's reinforcers. And I think that you need to be in control of the environment. And I think that when we start training a dog, the greener the dog, the less experience it has, the less hands-on we've got with it, the less trust and control and buy-in we have from the dog, the more we need to actually control all three of those things. And we need to then focus on the fact that if there's one of those things that's out of our control, then we must entirely control the other two. What's your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree with you. I think that when you're in any type of learning/teaching phase of your dog's journey, they're in such an elementary phase of their life that everything is overwhelming and distracting if you allow it to be. So anytime that you're trying to shape or create new types of behaviors or instill a behavior into a dog or a system into a dog, number one, you've got to be elementary minded yourself. You've got to be thinking, what is it about this area that I need to create into the best type of Skinner box that I possibly can? And when you started talking about controlling resources and controlling the environment and so forth, one of the things that I've been reminding people of many, many years now is if you're in an environment where there is something that's remotely competing with what you're doing, then you're 50% there. And it's kind of like having a conversation with somebody where you can see that they're looking over your shoulder all the time because they'd rather be somewhere else. So they're kind of invested in your conversation, but they're also kind of invested in the conversation that's going on over your shoulder. In those sort of situations, you feel like, oh, what's the point in trying to have this conversation? You can just see that the person is overwhelmed or more excited about what's going on at the back of you. Whereas generally those types of conversations, and I'm referring back to humans now in comparison to dog training, but generally those type of conversations are better off in another room, away from the distraction, away from the stimuli, away from the noise, so you can actually get that person to comprehend and listen to what you're trying to say. Teachers do this in school with students, sometimes where they have to take them out of the classroom because they're competing or they're embarrassed or they're showing off or they're doing something in front of the group of students where learning is not actually happening. There's nothing that's transposing that's becoming a valuable asset at that time for teacher or student. So, mate, I totally agree with you. I think that there's a lot of things that are triadic in nature or even shaped in nature. There's systems where people will say, this is a triangulation or it's a cubic, got to follow the quadrants or the angles of the triangle in order to do this. Like it's even when you describe how fire needs to be successful to start, it needs fuel, oxygen, and heat. Take any one of those away and it breaks down the system. Like you just won't get a fire to evolve. So you kind of look like you're building a fire when you're training a dog. You're getting something to manifest, and you need all of those elements to complement each other in order to be successful. And especially in teaching phase, especially in that mindset where the dog is so easily distracted, it's so ready to wander off. But if you can captivate the dog in that time, if you've controlled all of those elements and you've got the dog before you, then the dog goes, this is exciting. I want to invest in this. What are we doing? And this is a huge mistake that mainly the pet training fraternity make, is that they got children invested in the program. They've got other dogs. They've got the dog outside. They've got people coming in. They've got guests or tradespeople or something like that. And then they wonder, why does this dog not listen to me? Because everything else in those environments, all the other distractions that are laid out before the dog's going, oh, this is like a smorgasbord of entertainment for me. Like I can go anywhere and get a resource. I can go anywhere and get a reward other than you. And then you're sitting there, instead of being the motivator or the teacher, you become the punisher. You become the person that only dishes out punishment to the dog. So effectively, you've got a broken down system from the get-go. The dog only sees you as, oh, you're the person that takes fun away. You're the person I learn what miserable life is about. All these people make my life grand. All these people make my life exciting, but not you. You're somebody that I go to with my tail between my legs because you're not a fun person. So that's me in a long-winded way of saying I agree with you.
So the reason I like to think of it as the triangle, and play along with me if you're listening, you imagine a triangle sitting flat, like imagine an equilateral triangle, like all the sides are the same. And the base of the triangle is sitting on the floor or, you know, your shelf or whatever. And those two you control. The third point of the triangle up the top, it can move all over the place, right? Like it can move left, right, up, down. You still have a triangle. It might change what type of triangle it is, but it remains a triangle while you've got those 2 points fixed. That top one, it doesn't really matter where it is. It can move around. And that's how I like to think of it, in that, like, when I think of, okay, in this scenario, as long as I really firmly control two of these things, I can get away with the third one not being so perfectly under my control. What I thought might be fun for us, mate, is to go through each of those points, because we can talk about the being in control of the dog and what the reality of that is. Then going through being in control of a reinforcer and what that actually looks like, and some, you know, unconventional reinforcers that people often find themselves in the presence of and not realize that their dog is enjoying the process of not doing the right thing. That the dog is not only enjoying the process of not doing the right thing, but it is being made more likely to, in the future, also not do the right thing. And then finally, we could go through some examples of, you know, where the environment can break down and how the environment can affect us. I thought maybe we'd start with the dog. Now, as I said, you know, right at the start, I love shaping. I love it. I love having the dog off leash. I like giving the dog freedom to make decisions. I like the dog being able to explore and experiment. And so when I do that, I am not in control of the dog, right? Now, there's a way that I can do it. Of course, I can put a long line on the dog. That's one of the ways I can do it, so that I'm not actually exerting any influence or control over the dog unless I absolutely need to. So a long line, a flexi leash, those are some of the things that I've gone to lengths to figure out ways to keep those on a dog during shaping sessions and not have them actually feel like they are a part of the shaping session. Back when I used to train in my garage a lot, I have eyelets in the roof of the garage. They're proper climbing eyelets that I could put my flexi leash through, so that I essentially had the dog on leash, but it was, by its intents and purposes, it was kind of I got the idea from Bart's flex pole. So that the dog has this huge amount of freedom, can move around, and it's unencumbered by a leash. It doesn't even necessarily, aside from that, there's there would always be a minor amount of tension on the collar. You can't avoid that. But the dog has total freedom of action and feels as though it has total control, like total freedom to do whatever it wants. But at any minute, I can stop it. When I do that kind of work, I am limited in what I can stop it from doing. Really, what I can do, like I can stop it getting further away in some instances, or progressing in what it wants to do, but then it still has the slack to go back the other way. Like I can't actually truly control the dog and stop it right where it is. here in my shop, you can't really see it, but like, you know, I've got these I-beams that go across the roof, and I've done the same thing there. So I can put a leash over those so that the dog can't be tangled in it. From its point of view, it's moving around completely freely, but I am in control of it. The other thing that I then wanted to sort of tease a little bit apart is often people will tell us that they are in control of the dog when they have their electric collar on the dog. There was a time I probably would have even been one of those people that said, no, like I've got control. I've got my e-collar on. It's like an invisible leash, but you know, you hear all these sorts of things. And I think that the reality of that, the amount of training that is required to be able to use an e-collar as though it were a leash, right? For a dog to go one way, have that pressure applied, and the dog understand exactly what that pressure is for and respond appropriately. The amount of training required to get to that point really means that in the training of a dog to do something, you're not getting there, because if the dog knew it, you wouldn't be able to use the e-collar to do it. And one of the examples I always use for this is, say, in a guard. Now, for those of you who aren't into the bite sports, in our game, in PSA, but in most games it's similar, there's an element where the dog has to let go of the person it's biting and stay facing them and guard them, barking at them perhaps, and wait for the handler to come over and interact. Or the dog has to be called off. So the dog is biting, and then I give the dog his command to heel, and he stops biting and comes running back to me. One of the things that always gives me the heebie-jeebies is when people have their dog out and they want it to go into a guard. They want it to stay looking at the decoy, and the dog just anticipates the reward from coming back. And so the dog leaves the decoy and comes running back to the handler. If in that moment you stim the dog because you're like, no, that's the wrong thing, here's a correction, there is next to no fucking chance that the dog is going to understand that that stim came from turning back on the decoy and then go, oh, right, I'm doing the wrong thing, I need to go back to face the decoy. The only way that a dog is going to actually understand that when it's got nothing but the electrics on is from numerous reps of that happening, where the electrics is paired to the leash that the decoy is then holding and brings the dog back into the correct position. The truth is, if you've done all those reps for the dog to understand it, it's super unlikely that the dog is going to leave the guard. So the people that we see do this, because I've seen some incredible trainers that can do that. When the dog has a misunderstanding as to what's happening, they're able to just give the dog a nick and the dog goes, yeah, got it. I made the wrong choice, turns around and gets back into the guard. I misunderstood or I anticipated, whatever. The dog gets it and gets back into the guard. But you are for sure not in the early stages of training if you can pull that off. So if you're in the early stages of training, you must be in control of the dog. And by that, I mean physically. Like there's a line on the dog, and when the dog decides to go in a direction that you don't want it to go in, you can physically stop it and say, no, you can't go that way. Like you can actually control the dog. The other thing would be, if the dog is confused and is looking for direction, I want to be physically in control of the dog so that I can give the dog that direction. Now, there's layers to this, of course, all right? It's not like this is like, it has to be this or you're wrong and you won't be successful training. Like I said, we've got 3 points of our triangle here. So long as you have 2 of them, very good. The third one can be a little bit sketchy, right? Because in our example there, where the dog would leave the decoy, and say I don't have any control of the dog, say the dog is totally naked, if the dog comes back to the handler, it's important I don't give him any form of reinforcement and I don't make him think even for a moment that he made a good decision, and I can take him back and I can put him in that position. I can walk him back in. And if I'm totally in control of the environment, then I control where the dog would go to. If I'm on a field or a small training space and the only decisions that the dog has to make are very limited and I'm in a position to be able to control those things, then I'm fine. And I control the decoy because the decoy is the reinforcer ultimately, right? So like it means that the decoy will cooperate with my training. He's on board. He's briefed in. He knows what's up. It means that at that point, if I take the leash off and I go completely nude, now that's my scary variable that can change the shape of my triangle, but my training can probably still be pretty successful, right? Like it's not going to be as good if I had all 3 of them under control, but it can probably still be pretty successful. Have you got any thoughts on other ways where people relinquish control of the dog maybe too early, or they think they have control of the dog when they really don't.
Just listening to your explanation of that, I just had a lot of images flashing up in my mind about the inaccuracies of what social media delivers as a package to people. That's where I really start to feel sorry for a lot of people who are watching it and thinking, oh, I'm a complete fuck up. I'll never get there. Like, I won't be able to do that. Just as we've explained throughout episodes that we've put out into the interwebs before, there's a lot of people who will never aspire to some of those dizzying heights of world championships or even regionals or whatever it is. I mean, I've had people come to me before and say, like, I want to do this with my dog. And I've looked at the dog and I said, it's not the dog for this. Even though it might be a Malinois or whatever it might be, it's just not the dog for this. It wasn't bred for this. It really wasn't designed for this. It doesn't have the bloodline to do it. It doesn't mean you can't do other really fun and cool stuff with it, because you can do amazing stuff with it. In fact, there was a while ago that I had a dog that came to me for sport training. Mal, I spent a couple of hours with the dog. I said to the owner, heartbreaking outcome. It's not going to be a great sport dog. Go and get a second opinion if you like. I would encourage it, but I can tell you right now, this dog is just not really interested in doing bite sports. Turned out the dog was very good at detection work. And we summarized through that. We spun the dial on a few different things with the dog and had a look, and it was genetically predisposed to scent work. Got it into nose works. It's doing really well. The owner's happy. The dog's living its best life. One heartbreak led to a discovery of another field. Getting back into this discussion, a lot of times when people are setting these fields up with their dog, when things are on track and we do have the right type of dog for the right type of application, what people are showing out on media is the last third. They're not showing the other 2/3 of the lot of confusion where that center point that you were talking about before, or the far point of the triangle. As we know about triangles that we learnt in schools, triangles don't have to be equal sides. Triangles can be all over the place. So you can have a shorter side and a longer side. So triangles can vary in the way that they're actually set up. And that's what we have to imagine when we're doing training, is that there is variability in that far point sometimes. That being said, there are times where you believe that all of the mechanisms that you have in place are going to establish the onset of training, the thing that you believe is going to happen. But then you discover that you have to do some additional things. And this is where I'm going to introduce a square, because you've got to think outside the square. So we started talking about triangles, and this is where I told you before. Now we get into the cubic side, where you have to think outside the square. You can't be so rigid, and this is where I'm not a systems man. I believe that it's nice to have a blueprint. I just don't buy into the cult mind that you have to have a system, because the system is generally set up for this particular dog under these particular types of rules. And that's great. That system works well for that minority dog. And it's a very, very slim percentage of dogs that will benefit from that system. But outside of that, the other dogs are prone to failure for it. And it's like the scholastic system, where a teacher will teach students and realize that I've got 50% of the students who are C, D, and E average in my class. They're not doing so well. That means that the teacher is actually letting down the students. They're not designing a program that's more generalized that will benefit the vast majority of people. Even though I'm shifting the paradigm all over the place here, I just had a lot of thoughts when you were talking about this before, because I've seen people who explain this and they don't explain it as well as you just did. And they start talking about locking into systems and how things have to be enveloped around rigidity, when everything that I've ever done, every type of learning that I've been invested in with great teachers, all of them have said there is fluidity to this. There is sort of like a hardcore blueprint to the learning phase, but then as you start to evolve along, you need to drop some of that rigidity and understand that your student needs some guidance, because they learn things differently. Some people think in figures. Some people are very tactile. They need to be felt through or guided through or even moved through. And I've seen those dogs before, where you actually have to move a dog into a place because it just doesn't get it. It doesn't understand that I need to be shaped like this. And this is where you were referring to before, Pat, with getting into that control mechanism of putting the dog back on a lead, because the dog just doesn't seem to understand the shaping parameters that you're trying to inlay to the dog anymore. And it's sort of all fallen away. Putting the lead back on the dog and tactically guiding or using a tactile method to guide the dog into position, the dog goes, oh, that's what you wanted me to do. Oh, I can see it now. Like I couldn't run it through my mind what you wanted before. And this is where frustration and conflict start to erode away at the very things that we're trying to build upon. That problem with erosion itself in training methodologies and training styles is where teachers need to go back and say, all right, if I'm setting up this triangulation system at the moment, what is it that I'm doing that's not speaking well to my student? Why am I getting this difference of outcomes? Like I have an expectation of this and the dog is completely not getting it. Even though I've reduced my increments, even though I've scaled everything back, even though I've created myself a perfect type of Skinner box in my environment, for some reason I've got conflict now. Sometimes I think it's because we're just not focusing enough on the increments and we're pushing past that, or an unexpected anomaly has appeared in our platform where we've just got to deal with that as well.
Yeah. As I think about controlling the dog, one of the main things that sort of gives me the heebie-jeebies about people who don't want to use a leash as much as I sort of press people to is that one of the reasons I want to control the dog is I don't want to let the dog get stuff wrong. I'll choose my words carefully, but it's one of the things that in the balanced training community, because we have a way to fix errors, right? Like because we have a way to say to the dog, don't do that. I think that sometimes we allow the dog to get things wrong too much. And there's times where I absolutely want to do that. There's times when I absolutely want to say to the dog, hey man, make a choice and I'll let you know whether that choice is right or wrong. But those times are usually pretty few and far between. And they're usually at the proofing point where if I'm in my proofing point, it's because I'm starting to slowly let go of each one of these points of control that I have in my triangle of control. Because ultimately we have to get to the point where no matter what's going on, whether we have the reinforcer or not, no matter what's happening in the environment, and no matter what equipment we have to use on the dog, when we tell the dog to do it, it's got to do it, right? So like, it's always the same example in my mind. When the dog is going to get hit by a car in that emergency situation, you need to be able to say to the dog, hey, I don't care what's going on out there. I don't care that I don't have a line on you, and I don't care that I don't have the ball or the food or whatever to reinforce you for coming back. When I tell you what to do, you have to do it because this is the difference between life and death for you, right? And so to get ourselves to that point, it's giving the full triangle as much respect as we possibly can, and then incrementally reducing one of the points. And when I start to relinquish control, letting go of control of the dog is one of the earlier points that I like to do, right? So that, because exactly that thing, I say to the dog, hey man, I'm not going to influence you. This is where I'm testing your training. Away you go. See if you do the right thing. But if you do the wrong thing, I still control the reinforcer. So you're not going to get it, right? You're not going to be self-reinforcing by doing the wrong thing. So we mitigate how wrong you can get. And the sort of, if I have to give you a correction or guidance, how intense that has to be, because what am I competing with? So if I'm not competing with much, then it doesn't have to be much. It's more just guidance at that point, saying like, hey man, you got it wrong. It's actually over here. But the dog never self-reinforced. And when I control the environment, I'm protecting the dog in that moment from when I'm like, okay, you're off leash. You can essentially do whatever you want to do. And I've got to take control and protect the dog over, like, I'm not going to allow the environment to attack you. Now that might be another dog coming into the space that we weren't expecting. You know, it could be a person interfering in our training. It could be some other animal. Like, it's something I've always faced. Like, both my dogs are so bird obsessed that birds is a thing that I have to worry about in the environment. And like I say, it's not something that derails me completely. If I get somewhere and there's a lot of birds flying around, whatever, none of this is an issue now because both my dogs are old and understand their training. But there was a time when I was like, okay, because I don't control the environment, there's birds here. I need to absolutely maintain control out of my dog. And thankfully, I also control the reinforcer because now I have to compete with these environmental reinforcers, which I don't control, right? So now I have to make sure that what I have is of as at least the same value as chasing the birds. And that might mean, okay, food isn't going to cut it today, right? Like, this has got to be some sort of intense game that's going to spin the similar dials of prey that these dogs are, you know, the mindset that these birds are putting my dog into. I'm the predator, you're the prey, I must be chased. So that informs me and says, okay, well, the type of reinforcer, the only way that I can actually reinforce behaviors in this moment is with that mindset. So I have to play some sort of chase, catch, fight kind of game. I have to let the dog think like, I know it's not a bird, but it's similar enough. You got to chase it. You fully got to attack, bite it, kill it. You know, those sorts of things that they want to do to the bird, but I'm not going to allow them to do.
There's an interesting point on that you were talking about before. And I think what people need to do when they're working through this process with their dog is create what's impossible versus what's possible. The way that I describe that, and to summarize on that, it's along the lines of what you were talking about before. If external reinforcers are possible, then it presents a massive problem in our training program, because then the dog is completely divided between where its loyalties are when we're trying to set up like our initial training paradigms. But if you do that constructional work, as you've just been describing, and you spend the time with the dog creating an environment where the dog goes, these reinforcers that I want are just impossible. I'll never get them. I never have access to them. It just doesn't work in that application. Or if I do have access to them, it only comes through the work in a pre-max style system. Like I can only get it when I do the work. Whereas then the dog starts to really enjoy the work because it realizes this is the gateway. It's a normal process. I was listening to you talking a while ago about, introducing a dog to play with a toy in front of a decoy because it was refusing the ball or refusing the wedge. I've had those same sort of problems. Mando did it the other day. I had him watching a dog on the field the other day while I was waiting. This is some time back. And he was getting all excited about it and he had all his attention on that. And I was sitting there next to him with a wedge. He was giving me absolutely no attention whatsoever. Didn't want to know about me, didn't want to know about the wedge. So I started moving him away and he realized, this is getting taken away from me. And then he turned to me, he looked, and I had a wedge and he struck it and we had a game, and he started realizing, okay, I can have fun and I can be involved in things. It's like that song, if you can't love the one you're with.
You can't be with the one you want, love the one you're with.
That's the song. That's the mindset that you're trying to teach the dog is, I know you want that, but it's not available to you right now. It will be, but not now. But this wedge is, and I want you to take this right now. There are a myriad of ways that people do that, and there's a myriad of teaching methods. People say, this is the way to do it, this is the way to do it. The way that anything should be done, specifically for the dog that you're training with, is following the system of using what works. It's not a system, it's just a way of life. If your dog is struggling with a concept and distance is the key, then use distance. If it's struggling with the type of item that you've got, try changing the item around. Like I've had conversations with people where they've insisted on using a ball. I've said, why don't you use a wedge? And I've said, my trainer says I'm not allowed to use a wedge. And I said, why? Why aren't you allowed to use a wedge? My trainer wants me to work on a ball. And I said, so you've never tried a wedge before? No, tried a wedge, bang, problem went away. Or had a wedge and changed it to a ball, bang, problem went away. This is why I said I'm not convinced that working with teachers with a fixed mindset or a fixed system in place is always the best thing, unless it's something that rigidity is required for. Like there is no way other than traveling the path. And those times are very far and few between in my experiences, because there's times where I've had to say, this is not working. It's just not working with this dog. I know it worked with the last 5 dogs, but it's not working with this dog. Let's try something else. Let's modify the program. The people who say no, the student or the other people in the group who say no, often they just want to eliminate their dog. They're not interested in exploring another method. They just say, no, look, I don't understand that. That doesn't work with me. I'm not happy to do that, because either it's an egotistical thing where the teacher is then exposed on the limitations of what they actually know about training and other breeds of dogs, or difficulty when difficulty arises. They only want to work with genetically superior dogs, and whenever a problem dog comes up, it exposes them, and then they get embarrassed about that. Rather than embracing it and saying, this is cool, like this is a fucking science experiment. I want to find out what's going on here. Like, how do I turn this in the dog's favor? How do I become a better teacher by learning to overcome this obstacle? And that's where I think dog training is exciting, is by reinvesting in that methodology rather than being embarrassed and thinking, I need to be the oracle of all things cool and only work with cool dogs so I can never be exposed as a partial fraud.
Yep. So before we go on to the next one, because I believe so deeply in the rule of threes, I'm going to say it for the 3rd time. The main reason I want to be in control of the dog as much as possible, especially as a balanced trainer, it means that not only can I help guide the dog towards getting the thing right, but when it's time to start relinquishing some control and giving the dog the opportunity to make decisions for itself and potentially get things wrong, it limits how wrong the dog can get it, and therefore how much convincing that he shouldn't do that decision again will need. And when you don't allow the dog to self-reinforce by doing the wrong behavior, it means that that behavior in and of itself is less likely to happen. And now it's very easy for you to say, hey, don't do that again. And the dog will go, right, got it, because nothing good came of it. And you're telling me not to. So fuck no, I'm not doing that. But if the dog is able to self-reinforce, now this goes into controlling the reinforcer, which is our next point. But if you're not in control of the dog and the dog is able to find some sort of way of having a good time in doing the wrong thing, it is going to be much harder. And if you're using compulsion, if you're using pressure, you're going to have to use more of it in order to get the dog to not do that thing again and to do the right thing next time. And so that's why I think it's so important. It's one of the things I see so many balance trainers think, well, if something goes wrong within my training, within my ethics, within the way that I do things, I can tell the dog not to do that again. I'm like, yes. And that's true. And there will be a time to do that. That's one of the cornerstones of why our style of training works. But we should still try and minimize that. We should absolutely try and reduce that to happen as infrequently as we can, because, we have to admit the eternal debate, old mate, Zach, what's his face, is going mental again online about balance training. And one of the things that I think is really important for us as balance trainers is to train ethically and well, but don't deny that things can go wrong in balance training. Just like in every form of training, things can go wrong. And every time you give a dog a correction, you are accepting a risk. Sometimes that's a tiny, minuscule, insignificant, nothing risk. But other times there's significant risk. There's significant risk that the dog misunderstands the correction. While I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, I am saying that you should be cautious when you do it and do it with very strong intention and understanding and with an end goal in mind, rather than just flippantly and without thinking it through.
It's interesting that you bring up old mate. I inspire people to never take the advice of somebody who claims to be at an apex and yet does everything they can to avoid all the challenges that are put before them by creditable dog trainers in the industry. I just think he's a big no-show. If anybody is even taking the guy seriously, you need to book yourself in for a psychiatric assessment.
I got triggered. This will be the last thing I'll say on him because I don't want to go to the next thing, but I got triggered by him the other day when something came up in my feed. I don't follow him anywhere, but it was suggested to me. And he's like, this guy, Larry Crone, he's kind of a small time influencer. Like, look at this. And he looks and he's like, oh, he's got maybe 30,000 followers or something like that. And I just felt like if I was there, I would have said to him, then why did you say his name?
Yep.
You said his name because you have no credibility and you're trying to get in a fight with Larry just so that there's something for you to do online. And you said his name because he is a big deal, because he is credible, because he is a person who has an actual following of people that recognize his skill set. Whereas you, on the other hand, are not that. Even though he represents everything that you stand against, you're trying to climb on his great big back and have him carry you into your next fucking paycheck, you pathetic little man. Anyway, let's carry on.
Oh, well, I've got to just add, well said, sir.
So the next thing that we want to talk about is controlling the reinforcers. So that feels like it's pretty obvious, right? Like that feels like most people who are training in a paint by numbers kind of way, they're like, of course I control the reinforcers. I've got the food in my pouch. I'm in control of it. It's like, yeah, that's true. But things can get much more complex than that. Now, for sure, we can head into a style of training where you don't necessarily control the reinforcer, right? Like you might head into the style of training where the reinforcer is not so linear. And we might even be doing things like indirect rewards where we say, well, the ball's over there on the floor, which is absolutely a way that most people, you kind of have to go through that gate at some point in your training where you go, I got nothing on me. You saw me put the ball over there. We're going to walk up to, the full field away from that ball, but you know where it was and that's what you're working for. And I'm going to release you to go get that. So in that moment, I'm not in control of that reinforcer. It's out there. Anything could happen to it. And as we progress in our training, that's where I then need to go, okay, well, if I'm relinquishing control of that reinforcer, I sure as fuck better control the environment, because if somebody else goes and picks up that reinforcer and I release my dog to that reinforcer that's not there, I've just had a great big lie. That's going to set me back in my training. Or if I'm at the park, I'm in a public space and someone picks up the ball and starts walking over to me, hey, mate, you forgot your ball. Right. And now my dog's coming at him at 1,000 miles an hour trying to steal the ball out of their hand. That actually is one that, like, I'm picturing a real moment when I was training, the ball was on the floor right near where I was. And this guy picked it up and was like, oh, mate, here's your ball. And like, he kind of known what I was up to, but he nearly had his hand bitten off, and not through aggression, but because like he's presenting the ball in a way that no person who knows what a Malinois is and would take it would present the ball, right? He's actually like fully hanging on to the ball and not like the way that everybody knows you should have it. It's like, get out of the way of that fucking thing. Let it be hovering in the air while the dog snatches it. So I think when we control the reinforcers, we at some point in our training have to relinquish control of the reinforcer, right? We have to at some point start putting it other places, but we also have to along the way start realizing, wait, in these early phases, there's other reinforcers. That's not necessarily this thing that I'm holding in my hand. That's what I'm trying to use as the reinforcer. And yeah, I've got total control over it. You're not going to get it till I hear the click. It's in my pouch or it's in my closed hand. And when I click, I'm going to open that for you, that kind of thing. But if your dog does something incorrect, if your dog does something that it shouldn't, and someone else laughs, to a certain type of dog, that's a hell of a reinforcer.
Yeah.
We just put a video into the Patreon of Jazz teaching Parker to wear booties. Now, everybody that's ever seen it, everybody's seen at some point in their life has had a video come up in their feed of a dog getting booties put on for the first time and that ridiculous walk that they do. In that video, Jazz uses all of her incredible control and manipulation of arousal and like, truly get in there and watch it, because the way that she could handle that dog, and you need to sort of understand the context of that dog. Like that dog is a fucking monster, right? Like he is one of the best dogs I've ever seen in my life in terms of capacity for violence. Like he's incredible. And the way that she has control over him, she puts the booties on him and she looks at me behind the camera because she knows I love the dog. I genuinely love the dog. And he is exactly like my dog in that he's a prank monkey. He enjoys doing outrageous things. We called him Parkour Parker his whole life because he bounces off walls and all kinds of stuff, but he enjoys making people happy. It truly is such a high value reinforcer to him that being liked to him is so high value that she looked at me dead in the eyes and she knew how hard it was going to be for me. And she says, "Don't you fucking laugh." Right? And I'm like, like holding it in. And as he and her get up and he starts doing that ridiculous high knees nonsense that every dog does when they first get booties put on and they have to work through it. She's dead right. If I laughed, it would have been hours and hours and hours of work to stop him from doing that forever. And he would have built up, his arousal would have built up. He would have started having an awesome time and he would have started bouncing off of stuff and running around ridiculously. And it would have been a headache to fix that. So that was a perfect example of she's totally in control of the dog. She's totally in control of the environment. We're in my shop here where there's nothing that can catch her by surprise, but she knows there's this one fucking variable reinforcer that I have to control right now when she looks at me and says, "Don't you fucking laugh." And I was like, I promise I'll try really hard not to. But that's one of the things. And for people who don't think that that's legit, there are certain dogs that laughter can be one of the highest forms of reinforcement for.
100%.
And that's one of the things that I've sort of always felt, but never said out loud until I saw Helmet Riser say the exact same thing. There were so many things that I saw him say, and you know, he's above reproach, in my opinion. Helmet is, for people who don't know, it still amazes me, which I think is fair because he was out of the light for a little while, but it almost doesn't matter which modern dog trainer you follow today. If you find out who trained them and who trained them and who trained them and who trained them, you land at Helmet Riser, just about.
He's
right?
a cornerstone.
Yeah, especially if you're in the protection sports, he is the source of a lot of what we do right now. And when he yelled at someone, because, you know, you're in the presence of dog training royalty, and when you get something wrong, that nervous laughter comes out, right? And he said, stop doing that because you are making progress in the wrong direction. You are reinforcing your dog with that laughter tells your dog things are going well. And it absolutely is not going well in this moment. So stop laughing in front of the dog. And even though it's your nervous laughter, you're doing that to relieve your own stress. And in doing so, you are relieving stress from the dog and you are telling the dog what's happening right now is correct. Now, it's a form of reinforcement in that terms of probably negative reinforcement because you're removing the pressure of the stress of the moment with laughter, but you're doing that at the wrong time. Since I heard him say that, like I always felt it. For me, it was one day when my dog was running through the house and he kind of stepped funnily. I've spoken about this before on the podcast. He kind of stepped funnily and he did this weird flip and got stuck in my couch. Like he landed between two pillows, like two back cushions, and landed upside down, stuck between them. And it was hilarious. And I laughed my ass off as I went over and helped him get out of the couch. He went and did it again straight away. He was like, yeah, that was great. And for months, it was his favorite thing to do. And he would look straight at me. As soon as he'd land and slam into that couch, he'd look at me and go, where's the laugh, motherfucker? And I did every time.
How many seminars have you been to now where people will laugh at a dog and the dog will turn to run to the crowd?
Every time. You see it all the time. So this is one of the things. Laughter is just one example. And so we won't stay on control the reinforcers unless you've got something you want to add, Glenn. But I think that's one of the things that people think, well, I am in control of the reinforcer. I've got the food. I've got the toy. It's in my hand. I'm in control of it. But at that moment, you need to have a think and go, what else could act as a reinforcer in this moment? And how can I control it? That's one of the things that's important, to look around into your environment. Now, this feeds us into our next topic of control the environment, but having a look and going, what else is in this environment that could act as a reinforcer to my dog and could be given to him either inappropriately or at the wrong time?
When I first learned to train dogs from Boyd properly, one of the points that he made, which I think is a very eloquent statement, and it summarizes it very clearly, and it's still something that I use to this very day. Primary reinforcement is whatever the dog wants at that time.
Yeah.
That's what's got to be remembered when people are thinking about what is reinforcement to my dog. It's whatever your dog wants at the time. It's the same thing for you. It's whatever you want or need at that time is primary reinforcement.
Yeah. So that especially feeds into like stock proofing, or depending on where you are in the world, you might call it like sheep worrying. That's what the reinforcer is. Those sheep are the reinforcer. And if you don't control them, then you sure as shit better control the dog. And you sure as shit better control some limitations on where the sheep can go, because you don't control what those sheep do. Those sheep want to stare at the dog and eye fuck it, or they want to run around and, through fear and draw prey. You better be sure that you control the dog and the dog can't get to them. And you better be sure that you control the environment enough that they can't run into the space of your leash, like where you're actually controlling the dog.
See, that's a very good point. And that's, again, it's something that people overlook when they're talking about training. And again, it's limitations on training knowledge. Like you can take a dog down that's got an issue with sheep standing in a paddock where you've done days and days on end, or you've done days leading into weeks on end, where the dog is then accustomed to the fact, like, I can't behave this way when I'm around sheep. I've just got to let it go, and I've got to do the things that you want to do, until the sheep change the paradigm and they start running around or, coming close to the dog. And the dog goes, well, we've never done that before. We've never had sheep walking up to the fucking fence. What do you want me to do now? Yeah. Even though you've got to overlay to the dog. No, it still applies. It doesn't matter what the sheep do. It's nothing. You can't do anything with the sheep. You can look at them. That's it. But you're not allowed to do anything when they change the rules. You've just got to let it go entirely. And that's a part of a long discussion with the dog that evolves into a training platform, that you've got to think about all these variables and lay it in. When you talk about controlling the environment, part of controlling the environment is allowing those things to happen over a period of time. Start with the increment small, start with the expectation very low, and then build into it as you're phasing through it with the dog, to a point where as you approach proofing phase, the sheep could come and jump on the dog, and the dog would look to you and say, what am I supposed to do? When we're still working with paradigms of aggression, it's the same thing that we need to teach the dog. You want the dog to look to you to take away the dog's ability to think about this, like, I'm going to act on this, where the dog looks to you and go, what should I do in this situation? You then say nothing. You don't do anything. You engage with me. You follow me, or you play with the thing that I want you to play with. And the dog goes, cool, I'm into that. That's where I see people very successful in being transformative in those applications alone. But mate, that takes a fucking hell of a lot of work sometimes with some dogs. It's not so difficult sometimes when you're dealing with puppies that you've raised and you're a conditioned handler, or you're a super handler, or you're a professional handler, or you're a remarkable dog trainer. Some of those things can be overcome really easy. But let's take people who have got rescue dogs, who have a very unknown entity, right up into the point that you took the dog out of that shelter. You have no idea what that dog's lifestyle has been like. No idea how many times that dog is reinforced on those particular stimuli. You have no idea of what was allowed to happen or what accidentally happened. Nonetheless, you've still got to show to the dog, you're going to be counter conditioned, mate. You're not allowed to do those things anymore. Even if you feel like you are allowed to do them or you have been allowed to do them in the past, you're no longer allowed to do those sort of things. But how long does that take? How long is a piece of string?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All these three things, control the dog, control the reinforcer, control the environment, they're so intertwined. But let's talk a little bit about controlling the environment. That can be one of the trickiest things.
Absolutely.
That can for sure be one of the trickiest things. That's one of the things that before I had my own dedicated training space and people would say, oh, you got to control the environment. Like, well, fucking good luck, mate, because I don't have the money for that, right? Like I don't have the space. I have to use public spaces. There's nothing I can do about that. And one day I remember having that thought and then realizing, no, I do the things that I can because I go at 5 a.m. to places. The environment is a constantly evolving thing. And one of the things that I've done plenty of in the past is going to places to scope out like when's the appropriate time to train. Mm-hmm. This is one of the things that we still face that when we're raising dogs to sell is that like we got to take those dogs tracking, right? So like we got to find fields, we got to find environments where we can actually track. We got to go to those places. I don't own a farm. I can't just suddenly produce a place where a dog can go and track every day. I've got to do that in an environment that I don't control. So when I'm in an environment that I don't control, now we can exert as much control as we possibly can via the timings that we go there, the risk mitigation that we put in place. Sometimes, depending on what I've been doing, we've even had spotters so that when we really needed to control an environment, we had people at the entry points and exit points where we have no legal capability to keep people out, but we can say to people, hey, do you mind just waiting 30 seconds while we finish this cereal before you walk through this space or something like that? Because we can control the dog's on leash, he's tracking, we're in control of him. We control the reinforcers because the food is where it's meant to be on the ground, but we're in control of the dog, or the toy is held by the handler, all of that. But then I've got to exert as much control over the influence of external forces, and that is the environment. That's a person coming in and derailing it. That's an off-leash dog coming flying in and causing an issue. I think that's one of the things that sometimes people don't understand. Even I sort of swing around a little bit on this when I sometimes see dog trainers overreact about off-leash dogs approaching them. There's an element of fuckery when I've seen a particular dog trainer kick the shit out of another dog that came and interrupted his session, but he's in an off-leash area of a training area. I'm like, mate, your dog's off-leash, so that dog has the ability to be off-leash. The fact that he went running up to you and your dog, that is overwhelmingly a normal thing that happens in this space. You're the abnormality in this space, right? Because the truth is, especially where I'm at, the dog park that I still take my dog to once a week so that he can go and remain social and be around, the dogs, they do all the things that dog trainers worry about, but they're all social dogs. There's seldom, if ever, a problem there. And so that's one of the things where if I was to kick a dog in the face because it ran in on the session, you're totally in the wrong because the dog was just like, hey, what's happening there, right? And you're in a space where a dog is allowed to do that. There's no rules that say that can't be the fact.
That's a really important observation, really important.
Yeah, so I think controlling the environment as much as you can, it's not always possible. That's one of the things I love about here. It's something that I dreamt of for a long time, is being able to afford a place where I could train a dog and not have to worry about controlling the environment, because I do. I close the door, I should put down the roller, and nothing is in here that I don't want in here, and nothing can influence me during a session. And in that moment, I can tick that and say, yep, my environment is taken care of. Now all I need to worry about is the dog and the reinforcers. But that's not everyone's reality. And in all honesty, that's seldom my reality when I'm not here and I still have to train various other places. You want to be as in control of the environment as possible because you don't want the environment to derail your training. And as I was leading to earlier, you do need to be careful because a significant aversive experience inside of a training session can have really long-lasting effects to the thing that you're trying to train. Like if your dog is tracking and it gets attacked in that moment by another dog, who knows where that association is going to be paired to? Is it paired to that environment? Is it paired to that dog or that style of dog? Or is it imprinted on that behavior? And so now your dog is afraid to track because he's worried about the other dog that could attack him while he's tracking. And he has to remain hyper vigilant. And when you ask him to track, he's like, no, there's no way I can do that. I have to remain vigilant at this time because I could be attacked at any moment. And that has happened to me in the past. You did not protect me. So therefore I have to remain vigilant. So it's a sliding scale, you know, you need to do the things that you can. Again, exactly as you've been saying the whole way through, mate, it's not a case of this is how it is. It's, well, do the best you can. Do what is right in that moment. Do the thing that is going to lead you to success, and don't be tied to what that is specifically. Let success be your guide.
That's another important point that you raised before. How the mind reacts to certain elements of trauma is not for us to decide what it's about. I mean, I've met plenty of people who are in your field, you know, have come from military and served and so forth. And some of the things that trigger them in environments, even to this day, like when they do come home and they've got post-traumatic stress about something, you know, like there's people that I've been and sat and had a conversation in a restaurant or something like that. And the way that they have to sit and position themselves, like they can't have their back to the room. They don't trust people the same way, even when they walk along a street, a busy street. Even though they know they're safe, they're in a different country and they're not going to be shot at. The event that's happened to them and what happened to their brain, I'm not in a position to fix that sort of thing. And sometimes with dogs like that, when stressors arise or even single event learning, which is in a negative element, there are some times where I'm thinking, fuck, I really wish that didn't happen. Like that has just made such a difficulty in trying to resurrect anything constructive that I want to build on from here. It doesn't happen all that often. And usually if you're a good enough dog trainer, you can work your dog through it. And like, you know, all the processes of systematic desensitization and probable counter conditioning to work through those problems. But still, nonetheless, if you're not smart about your environment, if you're not putting some thought into them. To give you an example, when you're talking about your shop, even the training studio at Dural, when I've taken dogs out there before who have been dog aggressive dogs, there's no dogs in there. There's dog smells in there and so forth, but there's no dogs in there. But for some dogs, hearing dogs barking outside,
that's enough.
That's enough that I'm having trouble and difficulty in dealing with those dogs. For a large part of the dogs, it's usually a visual thing in itself. So I'm like when talking about the 90s percentages of dogs, it's really a sight thing, like visually locking onto the dog, which is causing the significant problem. But for some dogs in those 5 to 10% range, it's hearing the dogs, or sometimes even if the dog is so sensitive, it's smelling the dogs. They just can't overcome it and they can't get through it, and you're not really making any progress. In fact, sometimes it's just a setback. Sometimes you're adding to a problem, like you've just found something that's just ignited the fire deeper and harder, and you're thinking that really wasn't a productive part of what I wanted to do. And again, as becoming a terrific observant handler or a terrific observant trainer, those are the modifications that you need to make a part of your journey into you need to become a journeyman in this story. Like, you need to understand, I can't control everything all the time, but I've got to try to the best of my capability. And I've got to try and have the foresight. It's like duty of care. You've got to have the foresight to see things before they could possibly happen. And only experience will allow that to take place. That's the damning thing of this in learning how to train dogs, is sometimes it's like the concept of making an omelette. Sometimes you've just got to break some eggs to make some omelets. And I've said that before, and people have said to me, oh, so you just want to fuck dogs up to make sure that you can get through? Shut the fuck up. People that say that, you're imbeciles. You're not the sort of people who should be advising people on how to train dogs. No, nobody I know who's a compassionate and brilliant trainer wants to do those sort of things. They happen along the pathway. There's just times where, unfortunately, things will evolve, and it would happen to anybody. It would almost happen to any trainer in any situation, because that dog is just so triggered in those environments. It's just like people. Some people, you can have like a very light conversation with them and they'll find something to trigger on. You just realize, I'm stepping on eggshells around this person all the time. And those dogs exist in there at those times as well. So I do agree with you, mate. I'm on board with what you're saying. I really like the idea of foresight and trying to control it to the best of your capability, because you do need to do this in order to work your dog through those elements of a teaching, training, proofing, or whatever you want to call those elements, without getting those difficulties of erosion through that. You have to be smart. You have to play this out. You have to think about it. You have to strategize. You have to go into your training environment and have a look around and think to yourself, what can I control here? What can I actually put my hands on? What can I do about this? And if something was to happen, what would I do in a situation where, like a bird flew into the training ground where I don't know what would happen with this particular dog, this client who's going to come to me. I don't know if a bird landed in the field. What would the dog do? How would that take away from the lesson plan that I'm trying to develop here? It doesn't mean you can scare away every bird or you can have one of those scarecrow things that fires off sound, because then that might be the thing that fucks the dog up.
Yeah, exactly. In that moment, you better control the dog.
Well, it can't be the paradigm again. I know I'm using the word paradigm a lot. We are the canine paradigm. But it can't be the paradigm of I knew an old lady who swallowed a fly and then go on to that level of ridiculousness that you end up fucking eating a horse to catch everything else. That whole nursery rhyme was about absurdity. And we can't be absurd when we're trying to play these things out or plot them out. We can't be absurd about them. But we do need to be thoughtful, mindful, and I guess proactive is the word that I'm searching for in my Rolodex of impressive words.
From my point of view, we call it that triangle of control. Control the dog, control the reinforcers, control the environment. You've seldom ever going to get all three. But you need to really, if you've got two, you should be fine. And the third one is what it is. And as training progresses, we start letting control of those things and letting go of control of those things to the point where when we call a dog a trained dog, it shouldn't matter what any of those things are. The dog can be completely naked away from you in whatever environment, and you have nothing that you can pay the dog with, and the dog should perform the task that you ask. That's what we do for us in PSA. That's the ultimate test of that. We're going on to that field where we don't know what's going to happen, or we know, but we're not in control of it. We're not in control of any of the decoys. We're not in control of any of the environment. All the environmental stresses that are going to go off are pre-planned for us. Now, dog enters the field, we take the collar off and we go, good luck, right? Like the dog, you and the dog, well, the dog is naked. You shouldn't be. That's against the rules. The dog is naked on the field and away you go. Like, see how your training holds up. But I truly encourage people. It's something that I really think about a lot, is that I want two of those things. I want to either control the environment, the dog, and the reinforcer. And so long as I have two of them, almost at whatever stage of training I'm at, I can be successful. But I have to start relinquishing control as I progress and get to the point where I say to the dog, like, hey, you're free to make some decisions now. But at that point, the dog has a proven track record of making good decisions.
I'm going to say it. I haven't said it for such a long time. Do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And that's on that third element, because sometimes that anomaly is something that you just weren't prepared for. But once you have experience in it and you have an understanding of it, you're educated towards it. So now you can do better. Now you think, now I know what I need to do better with this dog. Now I know where the triggers lie, or where that external application, I could do some other things to prevent it from reoccurring again. So like I said before, sometimes the oversight comes in that you weren't educated at that point in time. And when you do have knowledge about it, do better. Just understand that now you may have some application in not completely controlling it, but being better in it overall. Before we wrap up, I want to send out some congratulations to Panos and Agnostu for writing his book.
Oh, yeah, he did. He sent me a copy of that. And Jane did the illustrations in it.
She did the illustrations.
I didn't even know she'd done that. You know that? I had no idea. He's like, oh, your missus did the drawings. I was like, really? I didn't even know.
That's right, she did, because he said that he wanted to change them from the usual pictures. So he thought, he was looking online at Jane's work.
And he wanted to own them.
He wanted to own them.
Like, he didn't want to rip off somebody and just copy theirs. So, I mean, it's great. Like, I retrospectively figured out what had happened. She got the reference material. She knows dogs a little bit. She knows how to represent dogs correctly. And so, yeah. Anyway, I'm not talking about her, but she did the illustrations for the book.
She did, which gives the Stewart family a little play in the Nooches Pooches method, which now Panos is an author. He has a book out. I was extremely privileged to be asked to write the foreword in it. I've known Panos since he was a little fledgling trainer. I had a little part to play in his role, as you have, and other people have. Panos is very curious and he's traveled around. He's gone to lots of seminars and he's worked with lots of people and he's done it a lot his own way. And even when he wrote the book, he sent me the manuscript and he asked me if I could have a look through it and just any thoughts or suggestions or anything like that. And I liked what he wrote and I really didn't want to be invasive about it. I had a few suggestions to him and I just said, look, I've read it. Here's some suggestions. Have at it. If you want to include them or you don't, all good, but it will still read well nonetheless. The point that I'm trying to make is that I actually got a little chuffed when he said to me, would you mind writing the foreword? And it's kind of like the privilege of being asked to be somebody's best man or something like that. I never took it. Yeah, I never took it lightly. I was so humbled when he did that, and I thought, what a lovely privilege to be asked to do that for somebody. So Panos, thank you. You know, I love you. I'm very proud of you. I think you're a great guy, great human being. And, you know, every word I wrote in that forward, I explicitly meant it. You're a terrific person. And I always used to say on all the courses I was teaching that there would be nothing I would love better than to read the book or to go to the seminar of somebody that I've played a small part in their journey into becoming a trainer. And now I've ticked all those boxes. I've been to people's seminars. I've read Panos's book and others. And, you know, I've watched people's online content and so forth. And it's lovely, really, really lovely. It's part of the completion of a journey when you're teaching people that you actually get to see them. It's not about you, which I've tried to explain to people on the podcast before. It's not about you. It's about the evolution of things. It's about people taking what you give them and making it better, making it more digestible, making it more profound, or adding to it, or finding new information. And that's the legacy that we should all be aspiring to, is not saying, see, that's me there. It's about saying, isn't that wonderful that I created the spark and this person's flame has now ignited, you know, and they're very hungry and curious and enthusiastic, and they're doing new things with it. They're looking at new angles and new principles. And I just love that of the great people in our community, you know, that they're going forward and they're showing people and they're helping in their own way of rescuing dogs, whether they be from breeders into puppies, into homes, or dogs that have been into the system, into welfare or rescue facilities themselves, that somehow or another we've played a part in giving people the tools and the information to then keep dogs in homes. And that's one of the things that I've really transpired to, and that's one of the messages I'm trying to encourage people to do in your dog training journey, is it should be just about keeping those dogs in the homes and making people feel like their dog is a beloved family member rather than a problem to be solved.
Yeah. All right. I feel like that's the place to wrap it up.
It is.
All right. That's it. Another episode, Canine Paradigm.
Yeah.
As always, if you like what you hear, like, rate, share, subscribe. Do that through whatever subscription service you download us from. Then just go do it to another one. No one checks. You're allowed to do it anywhere you want.
Anywhere, apparently.
Yeah, totally anywhere. Never discount the ability to just play the show loudly. You don't have to put your AirPod in somebody else's ear. You could just take your AirPods out and just play it directly through your phone so that everybody on the bus or the train or wherever you are can enjoy us.
Yeah, we
think if you're at
we wouldn't like you to get assaulted by putting, you know, a greasy AirPod into somebody's ear and suddenly finding yourself on the giving end of a pretty firm correction.
Exactly. And if you're at a family event, barbecue, something like that, and someone like dials up the Bluetooth speaker and wants to get some music going, just play the Canine Paradigm. Maybe if you're in traffic, you know, when you're in traffic and there's like lots of people passing around you, like you're in a busy intersection and people are crossing.
Yep.
And they can hear what's going on in your car. Just turn it up really loud so they can hear the Canine Paradigm.
Or if a guy wants to come over and wash your window, just say, hey, I've got a spare seat here. Hop in and listen to this. This is fucking, this will get you going.
Take him for a ride.
This will get the lead in your pencil, son.
Don't let him out.
Don't let him out.
Okay, and if you want to support the show, best way to do that is jump into Patreon. A few bucks a month gets you this giant backlog of information as well as new stuff going forward. And, you know, there's all different tiers. You can get into the one where I'm live once a month to answer questions. I really enjoy doing that. You know, it's the same crew of people that ask the same questions all the time. So it's over the years, that's actually been really fun to do because people have asked me questions with client dogs and their own dogs. And then they come in the next month and they go, okay, if that worked, what's my next step? And so it's been fun journey to do that. So you can jump into that in Patreon. But another way to support the show is with Spring. You could buy some cool merch and there's links to that in the show notes. There's links in the description and all that. If you want to get in contact with us, one of the best ways to do that is to jump into the Facebook discussion group. That's one of the best places to group source information. We have a Facebook discussion group. It's got 11,000 odd people in it, and it's people who are mostly supportive of each other and finding ways to help each other in the dog space, which very much I enjoy. If you want to get in touch with us directly, if you shoot us an email, we are info@thecanineparadigm.com. I hope your dogs live forever. Goodbye. Yeah.